Things have really begun to escalate with this entire FTX situation, because now we're having the House, the Senate, and the SEC all get heavily involved. In fact, they want to make sure that Sam Bankman-Fried shows up, whether it is voluntarily or not. Now, with this, we have a whole bunch of regulation news, so I want to spend this video talking about everything that has escalated, what has changed, and the potential regulation that we could see moving into the beginning of next year. So if that interests you at all, make sure you stick around for the entire length of this video, as there will be important information discussed the entire way through. Now let's talk about the whole Senate situation first, because the Senate Banking Committee wants Sam Bankman-Fried to appear before it next week in person, and we'll talk about why that's significant in just a second. But they want to discuss what happened with the collapse of FTX, and they've even said that they will subpoena him if he does not appear voluntarily. Now, what does all this mean? Well, for starters, he has been living in the Bahamas inside of his penthouse, and he hasn't had a real reason to leave there. Now, he has appeared as a guest on a number of conferences and podcasts and things of that nature, but he really hasn't left the Bahamas since the entire FTX implosion really begun at the beginning of last month. So what the Senate is saying here is, hey, whether you like it or not, we're going to make sure that you get out of the Bahamas into the States and appear for this hearing, because we want to question you in detail about where these billions of dollars are. Now, one would think that this is ultimately going to be a win. We'll finally get him out of the Bahamas and back into the States. But the reason why all of this is so odd, because he actually agreed to testify at the U.S. House hearing on Tuesday of, I believe, next week. So will they have to subpoena him at the end of the day? It doesn't look like the Senate will have to, because he has openly agreed to show up to the U.S. House hearing and testify about what happened with FTX. Now, if you've seen any of his latest interviews, he has been pretty much saying nothing. Whenever questioned about the situation, he goes, oh, like a mistake was made, I don't know what happened. And it seems like he's in a bit of denial about this, but I have a feeling that when he is in front of the government and when a real investigation really starts to begin, then things are going to escalate beyond more of, oh, I don't know what happened. Because when it comes to a matter of billions, if not tens of billions of dollars, there simply is no more answering with, I don't know. It doesn't work with the government, it doesn't work in court, and it certainly won't testify well. So as this continues to unfold, and as he is presented in front of both the House and the Senate, it looks like we're gonna hopefully start getting answers as early as maybe even the end of this month, maybe even as early as next year. So if there's something to keep your eye on, if you are affected by this FTX situation, then definitely keep an eye for what's going to happen at these US Senate and House hearings, because they're going to be happening in the very near future. Now, a whole other side to this debacle is that there have been so many celebrities promoting different kinds of cryptocurrency platforms, or even just straight up cryptocurrency scams. And now what we're seeing is that there's a ton of lawsuits out there against people like Floyd Mayweather, Kim Kardashian, the Paul brothers. I mean, even Tom Brady's at risk because he was one of the faces of FTX. And so, in light of all of this, the SEC has issued new guidance requiring for companies to ultimately disclose their cryptocurrency risks. And so this could be for companies that are directly working with cryptocurrencies and blockchain tech, or even with companies that have inadvertent risk or indirect exposure to things like cryptocurrency and the whole crypto market. So what we're going to likely see over the course of the next year or so are a lot of these companies that don't want to be fully compliant with these new transparency laws begin to leave the United States. In fact, there's already been a couple in the last couple weeks that have came out and said, hey, due to new regulation and what it looks like things are going to change here, we are no longer going to be able to operate and offer services inside of the United States. Now, some of these projects don't want to be transparent with how they are managing their cryptocurrency and how they're managing customers' money, and some of them have ill intent and others don't. I mean, at the end of the day, we won't always know which one of these projects are having kind of shady things happen in the background and which ones just want to keep things more private. But again, I think over the next couple months, even over the course of the next couple year, we are going to see a few other projects follow in this footsteps of just saying, hey, we can no longer offer our services in the United States. Now, I think that the bulk of regulation here is going to affect centralized services and how they report. So the everyday retail user like you or I is not going to be that affected by the regulation that's coming here, meaning that I don't think we're going to have a lot change from the way that we normally interact with crypto. I think that the bulk of what is going to change over the course of the next year is going to be more of an industrial kind of approach, for meaning that these companies and how they interact with the government and how they report is going to be the bulk of the change. So if anything, they're going to have the hard time with this regulation, and I really don't see too much of an impact happening on the level of like the average retail trader. So it's not going to be like you're not going to be able to use Coinbase, or you're not going to be able to use Kraken, or the amount of cryptocurrencies that you're going to be able to buy substantially decreased. I don't think anything like that's going to happen. I think that the large majority of crypto projects that we know and love are still going to be tradable in a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now. I don't think that that's going to be affected. That doesn't seem like it's the government's mission to limit the amount of cryptos that we are trading or even investing in. But what it does look like is, from an institutional standpoint, they want to make sure that there's clarity so that something like FTX or BlockFi or Terra Luna or UST, and the list goes on, they want to make sure that something like that does not happen again. And if that there is some kind of ill intent that is happening behind the scenes, that they know about it before everything implodes, and they can kind of maybe even get their hands in these centralized companies that are maybe manipulating their balance sheets or even lying to their customers' faces. So at the end of the day, when we go ahead and we look at this Bitcoin chart, things still are recovering fairly well from this local low. As we've talked about in the last couple of videos here, we have just been kind of consolidating ever so slightly upwards for the last 2 weeks or so, from our bottom of around $15,500 up to our current point of around $17,000. And all that we've really been doing here is bouncing in between support and resistance from around the $17,500 range, which is actually the previous low that we saw from our past consolidation range, bouncing in between there and our new yearly low. So for the time being, it looks like we are just going to continue bouncing from top to bottom until one of these ranges break towards either the up or the downside. But right now, at the moment, we are definitely squeezing up. We can see this nice little support line that is squeezing against this flat level of resistance. So while I would like to see this break, we're definitely going to have to see what kind of action we get towards the beginning of next week, maybe even this weekend. But there's no true kind of like decision area for Bitcoin. I think if anything, right now we can look at the trend and say that the trend is ultimately our friend. And you know, the overall trend right now is ultimately pointing downwards. So again, not a clear decision process. There's no kind of clear indication that Bitcoin is heavily bullish or it's heavily bearish here. It looks like we're just in a very choppy zone where things want to consolidate until there is a little bit more clarity in the markets. But rest assured, we are going to keep you aware of everything that's happening in both the chart and the news. So if you want to stick around and you like the content that we have, definitely consider hitting that subscribe button. It helps out the channel a lot. But until next time, everyone, I will see all of you in next week's video.